And we're live on YouTube. Again, this is the Open RFC call for Wednesday, April the 15th. I'm your host, Darcy Clark. The meeting notes link I just pasted in chat. Feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list. Let me know if you can edit that. As usual, we'll be following the agenda that's posted in the npm/RFCs repo. Just to be mindful of the code of conduct that these meetings are all held within, as well as any conversations within the RFC meetings. We just ensure and want to make sure people are being mindful and thoughtful as people speak. Please raise your hands when you'd like to contribute. Today, I'm going to be trying to take notes as our resident note taker, Claudia, can't make it today. So I'll try to do my best there. As well, these calls, just to reiterate sort of the desired outcomes of this and the intentions of these calls is to get closer to the community and hopefully move RFCs forward or move conversations forward. We run these bi-weekly with a alternating bi-weekly call for deep dives. So we'll try to pick a session or a topic that we'd like to go a little bit further in depth next week by the end of our discussion here today. And appreciate everybody jumping on today. Again, the agenda should be in there in that meeting notes doc. And before we jump into the items that were listed, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to give? Any introductions for first-time folks on our RFC calls? Andrew, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Sure. So hi, I'm Andrew. I work for IBM as a software developer. Involved in node.js package maintenance, or starting to get involved, looking at dependence tooling. Yeah.
Awesome. And Glenn?
Yeah, so hello, we've met on other calls before, but exactly the same as Andrew, interested in the package maintenance, and I'm on the triage team for Express, which has spurred my interest in the dependence.
Awesome. Yeah, so jumping into the first actual RFC that we have here is issue number 125. So expose a dependence API, which was created by Roy, I know, as sort of an outcome of some of the discussion that was being had in the package maintenance working group, and potentially just trying to consolidate that and bring it to the forefront for us to think about and how we might support something like that. I've heard this numerous times from the community that there's a want and a need for us to be exposing that information in a meaningful way. Not also on the website even, to split up dependence information from also like having dev dependencies as a thing that's specifically there. So we have an internal issue backlogged to do that work, which would also require essentially having that API exist, which we don't think it does today. So it would make sense that once it does exist, we would potentially expose that publicly. I think, Glenn, you were the last one to actually speak to this in the thread itself. I'm not sure if you want to maybe elaborate on it.
Yeah, so we all understand the whys and the wherefores. As we begin to carry out maintenance in a more serious fashion, we'll find that we're on modules, and we'll have a good idea who, like, the one or two most dependent people are on it. But we soon get to realize that there are a whole slew of people that we might wish to inform or even test against. And it is really for tooling and for maintenance that I come to this from. But I can see that we'd have a greater need anyway. But to be able to give people a heads up that, hey, breaking change coming, you're the top 10 people, you're important to the ecosystem. That's kind of what we want, a sort of a community way of being able to find out who we will impact as these very important packages get handed off between sort of, let's say, intergenerational maintainers now. And it doesn't like a human generation, but it may last 3 or 4 years of one person, and then the life changes might happen. They may have children. They may go into management and have teams to manage, and it changes. And it's that we wish to help with as packages get passed, but they still remain incredibly widely used.
Yeah, it's a good note. This sort of ties into, I know Dom has asked me previously, and historically we've tried to bubble up data about, the entire ecosystem, like top downloaded packages over ranges. I know we have a downloads API that's exposed. It's a bit limited. And that's something else that I'm sure would help in terms of informing the community and being able to have the community create tooling specifically around package maintenance, right? Like how can we better support, let's say, those top packages, or ensure that like if one of those top packages changes its depths, or it's, as you say, like breaking changes, that the ecosystem is well aware of those changes, or we're able to support those top 10, 15, 20,000, who knows, like whatever that looks like. So I definitely see this as being important. Don't know what the actual realistic time frame looks like to expose this data. I would say like end of year, like Q4 is probably like earliest, I would say. But again, I can't really give any promises about when we'd be able to support this. I know that like there's user land tooling that some people have tried to create utilizing the existing APIs to try to like surface this, bubble up this information. So which I know is tedious to maintain. So it'd be great if it was something that we could support natively going forward. So yeah.
So I only have one other request. In the interim, if it's say a Q4 type thing, and we're grateful for any support we get, would it be possible for community members to actually say, this particular one we are worried about, we are making a breaking change, could you just tell us? But even before you get an API, you could run it internally. I know that's extra, because I think we have 1 or 2 things we are concerned about changing. And I'm looking at the Express team. And I've been looking at the Express session module, and it's not huge, but it's 11 million downloads a week. It's key. And hey, I can guess the top few, Redis, Mongo, and then it just sort of tails off into various flavors of SQL. And I really couldn't pick one from the other. And some I'm surprised about, that they're so few stars, but that might be a help if we could just have, this one, who are the people? Just 1 or 2 in the interim time. But so, tooling is the end game.
I don't want to unmute for too long because I think a neighbor has got some long thing going on. But somebody on Twitter just last week posted something about doing like a BigQuery analysis of, they had pulled, I think, the entire set of GitHub repositories and used that to then analyze NPM packages. Anyway, approaches aside, I think there are some ways that if there was some money put behind it, you could do the analysis you're talking about without NPM necessarily needing to expose this API today. So we might be able to reach out to that person and see if there's a interim solution.
Yes, yeah.
Visual hand
You're
up.
putting
so
me in contact that with, yeah.
Sure. And Dom, you have your hand raised?
Yeah. SkimDB, that still exists, right?
Yep,
that information should be in there, right?
Yep.
All the documents are there. So it should be possible to write a query that does that out of database directly.
It's not called SkimDB, but yes, it's replicate.npmjs.com. So yes, you can replicate the couch metadata. It's a little bit fiddly to get it just right. Glenn, to your point about, is it possible for, someone within OpenJS or some other kind of, some of these other major projects to just reach out to us and ask a question? Like we're happy to help if we can, within the limits of reasonable time investment. but what I think there's actually some push for here, which we've also discussed internally, again, in that kind of Q5 planning timeframe, is actually having a proper GraphDB type implementation for registry dependencies. What that would also allow us to do is a lot more interesting stuff on the security side. So, for example, it's a little bit hairy right now that, you've seen this whole issue with Minimist and how McDerp depends on it and everything depends on McDerp. And then it's very difficult to sort of unravel on the client side or even within the audit API endpoint, what exactly needs to be done in order to fix your problem, even though to a human, it looks very obvious. So we're doing some improvements on that in NPM v7, but a proper graph database would allow us to do a lot of interesting things, above and beyond just a dependence API, and would be much more, much easier to get those kinds of answers much more quickly than, than just looking at the like replicating the CouchDB and kind of building it up for each individual ad hoc use case.
Okay, agreed.
Yeah, and just noticed whoever's been taking notes, I appreciate that. I literally fell off as soon as I started talking. So thank you. So is there anything else we want to speak to, I guess, on this then, Isaac, in terms of like this dependence API RFC?
Well, I think, there's a bigger conversation here maybe about like how we handle RFCs that come into the NPM RFC's repo that are not about the CLI, because it's, we kind of don't have the key people to weigh in on a dependence API, right? It's more of a back end issue, and this is kind of tends to be more focused on CLI. Of course, understand that line being somewhat blurry from outside of this particular organization. But we're somewhat blocked on, like, even if I say, yes, it's a great idea, I accept this RFC, I'm not actually the one who has to say yes to it, right? So it feels somewhat awkward to weigh in too deeply.
For dev dependence, at least, there was like an API in CouchDB. Like I had a PR on the website ready to go before it got pulled private. And like, I mean, this was a long time ago, but like,
it was.
Like Lori was telling me as soon as I made the PR that it was easy to pull in.
Yeah.
So why is that one hard still?
So that actually got a lot harder. The reason being that we're not really using CouchDB as the database of record for almost anything nowadays. We use it as a almost like a glorified PubSub type of thing that has really good peer replication, just to store the document metadata itself. But all of the views have been ripped out of it. So the way CouchDB generates its MapReduce views is every time there's a write to the database, it reevaluates all of the views that document was a part of. And so this is really good and lets you kind of like pre-generate so that you can fetch this data very, very quickly. But the downside is every write was getting, we hit this hockey stick point where every write was getting increasingly more and more costly in order to make, because it had to it was just constantly in review generation mode. And the other explosive aspect of this is disk space, because it stores the results of all of those views on disk in a separate file. Which again, really great for like the first, 100,000 to 500,000 documents. And then we hit this kind of hockey stick point where just our Couch servers were constantly out of memory and pegging CPU 100% of the time. And so we ended up decommissioning all of those views and migrating that to a more kind of appropriate database structure. So all of that stuff now that's on the website is actually gathered by making queries against Postgres. And it's all heavily cached and stuff. So just adding a thing that hits the view into the website, not going to work, because those views don't exist in our actual implementation anymore.
Yeah, and maybe to speak to the first part there, Isaac, I know that we have a registry label, but we I know that there was discussions previously as well about potentially having registry-specific RFCs created, or like trying to create that distinction. So something actionable maybe there is for now at least ensuring that we've labeled any RFC that's coming in that has registry-related topics to it. I know that although we might say that, you know, this is definitely something that we all agree to in terms of a design of APIs, et cetera, it's definitely something that we've always had to champion again internally. And what we could do or try to do going forward is once something has been added with that label, or a label's been added to an RFC like that, or a discussion like that, we try to bring to these calls specifically folks that would essentially green light the implementation details from the registry side. Does that sound like something we'd want to be doing? Or do we want to have a complete different discussion or like calls?
I think we should start applying that label a little bit more more diligently, and then have like a registry specific Open RFC call maybe monthly or so.
And also maybe like creating those almost like swim lanes or distinctions when we're talking in these forums, so that we everyone's aware that there might be limitations to, you know, the stamps of approval that are
dependencies.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I don't want to come across as like, you know, blaming the user on this. Like I totally understand that, like, sometimes the distinction is very, while it seems obvious to me, it cannot be obvious to users who don't, you know, kind of understand all of the finer points of like what's a registry issue or what's a CLI issue. And so having one kind of bucket where users can throw their ideas is really, really valuable. And then we should just kind of sort them and make sure people are saying yes and no to the right things.
Issue templates are friends here, so I'll take that away as something that I can try to champion and make sure that we're driving discussions in the right direction, and then also have mechanisms to ensure they don't get lost and that people feel like they understand like how to contribute these ideas, and that they're actually going to get, you know, championed or like actioned on properly.
I think just an issue label we apply, and then a separate call is probably, you know, just make sure it gets in the right agenda would be probably fine.
Sure. Sounds good.
Did I miss it, or because there's also a lot that we've brought up that kind of have a component in both? Mm-hmm. If you do a separate call, would those be talked about in both, or?
I think we would back.
Presumably the registry portion of that thing would be discussed in that call. I still think this is a good place to kind of start a lot of that stuff and just identify, like, here is a registry dependency that this CLI feature has. You know, and these things might range from like, well, it's actually trivial, I can just kind of wade into that code base and send a PR to that team, all the way up to like, this requires a complete, you know, a completely net new technology service that we have to spin up, or a refactoring of an existing one, even worse. And then that's where it gets much more hairy. And I generally try to guide things in the direction of like what we can actually do with what we have today. And sometimes there's a surprising amount of stuff we can do just in the CLI itself. So I think what we have now is a good start, but we just need a better forum for kind of identifying like, this right here is a purely registry thing, and like, there's no way the CLI can give you a dependence API, right? Like that's got to be a server-side piece.
Yeah, just be mindful of time, because I know we have a pretty large agenda that I'd like to try to get through. So if we want to, let's follow up here with some actions on the actual issue itself, add that label, and then the broader sort of conversation about how we distinguish between CLI versus registry related content or suggestions should probably better document that somehow. So cool. So moving on, issue or item 3, issue number 115. So add top level bin dependencies to package JSON. I know this is, we've spoke about this in our last Open RFC call as well. Isaac, I'm not sure if you followed up on this conversation. It looks like the creator, Jake, has essentially been talking into a void, unfortunately. So it'd be good if we can maybe follow up there.
Yes, I have been, it's been on my plate and I have not gotten to it yet.
Sure.
But yeah, there's some big challenges with this one.
Yeah, exactly. This is, again, I think we spoke to it. We don't want to create another dep type is kind of the ultimate, I think, place we got to.
The specific implementation and kind of proposal here, I don't think is going to work, but we can maybe dig into the use case a little bit more and see if, you know, workspaces or something else could just address this need a little bit better.
Sounds good.
Or a little bit more cheaply. For
sure. Okay, so since there isn't much to discuss there, I want to get into the two items, number 4 and 5, RFC 114 and RFC 103, expanded list of ignore files and add npm workspaces. These are both, I think, owned by Roy. If you want to maybe speak to them quickly and just maybe give a status update on both.
Yeah, for the expand list of ignored files, I think I have action items there that I haven't got to yet. So, but basically, yeah, I think we discussed enough last time, but I don't know if someone has anything more to say about this one.
No, I think the outcome was essentially, based on the last RFC call, was that we would essentially pare down we didn't want to do any breaking changes. So expanding that list more aggressively I think would be a little bit hard to be palatable. So yeah, I'm not sure if you've updated the RFC since we had that discussion.
No, yeah, not really. But yeah, but it's documented there. Like, yeah, let's reduce to only add items that can be really harmful or problematic.
Like credential, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then in terms of the workspace RFC, unless anybody else had any thoughts that are different from what we spoke. Jordan, I know we're there. No. Okay. I know it was pretty extensive.
I'm here. I was spacing out for a second.
Yeah, I think that based on our conversation 2 weeks back, it was just essentially to pare down the list, make sure it's not something that might be disruptive to folks that are already throwing in those files that we don't want to over flag things that people are actually using. Passing around editor config and packages might be a thing that the user land actually does. So, could you give a quick update then, Roy, on the workspaces RFC and maybe give some insight into the work that you've been doing recently?
Right, yeah. So workspaces, the RFC itself should be good to merge, which it's it brings a good question I have to make, because the first time one of my RFCs is getting merged. Should I rename the file and then we can just merge it? How do you actually merge the RFC?
Yeah, so what I usually do is I rebase on top of the latest branch and then rename the file to take the zeros off and give it, you know, its official number within that folder. And you can just make that all one commit with the pull tool that we use for everything else.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. And then the progress side of things, right now, yeah, we have made good progress with the implementation. So we put together this list of projects using workspaces that we're going through. Yeah, I got some feedback from Wes, Jordan on that, and thank you to both of you. So yeah, but right now it's still development phase, I guess.
Yeah, I guess what is most notable is that the work that you've been doing is sourcing user land, like implementations of workspaces and different examples of projects that are utilizing the tools that exist today, and ensuring that there's going to be as little churn as possible based on the way that we're implementing it, which I think is a really mindful and thoughtful approach, which is great. So if anybody knows on this call of really popular projects that are using workspaces today with Lerna or Yarn, it might be good to surface those to us, just to make sure that people can adopt npm workspaces wholesale once that's ready to go. So,
yep.
Awesome. So moving on then, there is PR number 92. So the RFC for stage workflows or staging stage publishes, which I know we did a deep dive call on about a month back now. Time flies. I'm not sure if there's been any update since that call. The last person to actually comment on this is Amelia. Not sure if they're on call. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything they want to add on to this.
Yeah, I know we had some pending notes. I've got a tab open on from our deep dive, and there's some updates to put in place there. I think where we landed was like not a ton of pretty deep changes in terms of how it's going to work within npm pick manifest. The biggest change was just the way that we structure the config and how we tell Arborist when to use staged publishes and when not to. And so I have not explored that through the, sort of pulled that thread all the way through the implementation yet.
Sure. I think the one key out of that conversation also was, I think we're going to transfer, I guess, like the ownership of that RFC, or like stewardship maybe from Daniel. I know he's sort of switched positions now in a company, so may not have the same time and resources to update that moving forward. So whether that's myself or you, Isaac, or whoever, we should make sure that there's somebody like keep an eye on that, just to update the language based on discussions.
Yep. I will take that on and make sure that the RFC in our repo before we land it matches the implementation that we're actually going to ship with.
Cool. And that's another one where we should definitely flag as dependent on registry implementation, right? So
yep.
Heavy dependency, which I think it already is labeled properly, but yeah, the certain design implementation details should be probably distinguished. Cool. Moving on, item number 7, issue 56, feature essentially create RFC or create the RFC for yarn-like resolutions. So last week, if folks weren't aware, we did again a deep dive last Wednesday on resolutions, and actually sort of mocked out or stubbed out a sort of schema that seemed to make a lot of sense and actually made things look a little bit less hairy, at least from our end. I know that, we didn't want to take the exact same approach that Yarn has gone with, so creating like a DSL. So I'm not sure, Isaac, do you want to speak to the new RFC that you've created, which is also on this agenda, essentially in response to that call?
Yeah, so the RFC that I wrote up, I believe captures everything that we discussed in that call, but in the process of writing it and then further discussions, we've identified a bunch of really interesting edge cases, in particular in how these rules and rule sets sort of stack and combine with one another. So I think that the net here is that I have some more work to do. And I appreciate, I've been discussing in Slack with Wes and Tierney Siren and Jordan and a few others. So I think that the where we've gotten to, I think, is good, and I'm going to have a lot more examples and use cases to put in that. It's going to be a very long RFC with, sort of getting not close to it. It will be an actual spec for how the feature ought to work. And because it is such a fiddly kind of a foot gunny type feature, I want to get as much documentation as possible about how it works and how it handles all the different edge cases that we kind of exhaustively can go through before we commit to it with an implementation and make
one
it
thing
a
that
lot
might be
harder to
really
change.
nice to address those concerns and help NPM's implementation and help me is if you had a separable test suite that I could plug in Resolve to, so that I can make sure that Resolve can support, like, so I can implement this support in Resolve and make sure that it is actually working. That way I don't have to write my own test cases.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely have really thorough tests.
I mean, what I'm specifically asking for is, and like, I think this is a general thing that would be nice for NPM overall, but is in the same way that like there's test 262, which is the test framework for all JavaScript engines to test themselves, and they all use their own runners or their own kind of, they like inject themselves and so that the tests are independent of the implementation. It would be really great overall to have an NPM test suite where I can say like, I'm going to test this tool, and here is how you run the install command, and here's how you run the uninstall command, and here's how you run, here's how you do resolution and stuff like that. I know that's a very broad, large ask, but like,
yeah, I'm not sure how likely that is to be.
Okay.
To write tests like that in a way that are that is fully independent from the implemenation.
Well, kind of what I was thinking
but
is
I think
the test cases would be like each case could be like a function with, you give it like some inputs of like, that NPM would be passing a little closure in that's like, do this thing. And that would be your current test case. And then I could pass something else that says Resolve does this thing. Just some, and then that part that could be like published as a reusable package, or even just on GitHub somewhere for me to pull in. Like, it may not be likely. I just wanted to throw it out there because this seems like a nice, pure, like separable step for that.
Yeah, it's pretty intermingled with the dependency resolution approaches. I mean, essentially, the test would have to be, here is a set of dependencies, and here is a registry with some known pacuments. Then it should resolve in this way, and essentially that's what the build ideal tree tests in Arborist are. So they're easily portable, but not exactly as portable as you're talking about. Not that easily. Okay. Another possibility is something somewhat similar to the tests in Semver, where which are reused by a lot of other, several other Semver implementations, where we have a list of, here are all of here's a laundry list of dependency ranges of various types, and then here's what they should parse to in terms of the actual comparators, or here's a, given this range, this version should satisfy, this version should not satisfy. And I know like the Semver crate and Conan and a few other projects use those. But again, there's still some non-zero amount of work to say, okay, well, given this suite of test cases, like here's how it should work.
Fair.
There might be like a step in there where we take like the config and then prepare it in such a way that could be potentially pulled out if we're supporting like yarn style resolutions in some way, right? So in some fashion, like that might be.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not planning on supporting yarn style resolutions per se. Where we landed was we're going to do a new thing called overrides,
right?
And that's what this RFC is to discuss. And part of this, we also are unaccepting the or rejecting the previously accepted RFC called package overrides, because it turns out that that's not actually a good enough solution.
So I would like to say that this type of request fits into a category that I think is interesting when we talk about arborist. So I've had a few requests that I think are in a similar vein, which is I actually want a piece of arborist. I don't want the whole thing. And if there was a way, as you move forward with arborist, to think about how the pieces of arborist could be more decoupled, I think that would be a great a great goal just to hold up whenever you make a decision. Because, for example, build ideal tree, I actually would like to be able to do some of that with like a mock registry, or some like build my own tree just in my own JavaScript that doesn't even talk to a registry, right? And just like I define the nodes and I define the tree, and then I tell it later to go and maybe reify, or maybe I don't, and I'm actually going to use some entirely other purpose. Which I've made the case a couple of times I wanted to do, and I ended up doing, but it was more difficult than I would say is good. So I think this kind of case would be a really great way to sort of challenge the design of arborists, so that maybe we could at some point start pulling out test cases and make them, something you could run against maybe not other implementations that install packages, but maybe there's other implementations that rely on having an understanding of how overrides works, because you're going to do some particular automation around it, right? And if you had that as sort of a piece you could pull out, it would make doing that extra tooling a lot easier, I think. So.
Yeah, I know I've given you this answer before, and just sort of for posterity in the call. Totally agree. I think that's a great idea. Also, we just, we kind of, while things are in flux and while we're working on it, it is a lot easier to just kind of keep it all together. We'll, if you crack open the repo, like as you've seen, like build ideal tree is pretty separable from reify and actual tree and virtual tree and all the other kind of major parts of it. And the node and edge classes are also pretty independent. So the plan is to eventually split apart and expose some of those other pieces, but in the interest of getting NPM 7 actually done, that's not the fastest way to move forward yet.
Totally agree, and I'm just setting it out there so that it's stated in a public forum and not in a Slack. And I understand NPM 7 is much more important as a immediate deliverable, so it's good.
Phased approach.
Yep.
Awesome. So that sort of touches on, obviously, the 8th item there, which is the actual RFC itself. So if there's any other discussion to be had, feel free to add comments in the RFC itself. In terms of the actual issue for yarn resolutions, I know that there's actually been a little bit of discussion while we've been on this call. Mile has chimed in actually on that. Potentially, I guess we can close out the issue if we've decided essentially we're not going to support yarn style resolutions, then we can point to the RFC. So I'm not sure, Isaac, if you want to follow up, and we can potentially just close out that ask.
I would have done it by now, but I'm on this call.
Yeah. Well, it seems like there's a couple of people responding to that thread right now. So, cool. So let's move on then to PR 121 or 121. The RFC for add link version comment syntax to version. I haven't had enough time to really look at this. These last two have been created just recently, these last two RFCs. I'm not sure if other folks have had a chance to look at this.
Yeah, I have some concerns with this. Mainly, I think the biggest thing is it will unfortunately drive people more towards installing things globally and using npm link in a way that is not sort of ideal. And I think it's a use case that's much more adequately served by using workspaces rather than relying on a specific version to be globally linked.
Jordan, it looks like you might have commented here on the initial RFC. Do you have any like comment or thoughts on this?
Well, I'm trying to look it up. This is 121, right?
Yep, it's the yeah, adding.
Oh yeah, no, that was just, I was just calming down the person who was impatient for a response.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
a
don't.
little bit.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. So okay, I had read this a bit ago, but then I didn't respond because it was one of these ones where I'm like, wow, I don't really know how to feel about this. Having said that and thought about it and it coming back up again, I think this is at least two things. So this comment thing is like sort of unrelated.
Yeah.
So even if we were to consider the link thing, I think we would want to like totally separate out this comment part, just to make sure that it's not distracting, because also probably never do it. Maybe that's my opinion, and you know, others don't share it, but I think that's a little bit out of left field.
No,
Here,
if we're gonna have comments
ahead.
on it, if we're gonna have a comment on a you know, a dependency that couldn't be resolved, that should be a completely separate thing, and you know, apply indiscriminately to any kind of dependency. It's my take.
Yeah, which is a very difficult. That's a very difficult thing, I think, to get to. Right? I mean, like, well, anyway, I don't see that as the main point of the RFC, right?
Right.
So, like, could we maybe say that, like, we should either recommend them to remove that and then talk about the linking, because I really do think this is an interesting one, and this is one of the things that Yarn has done some related effort in. Right, and I think that deserves at least a discussion.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just sort of leaving aside the comment aspect myself. My comments on it are just related to, like, should we have link as a effectively like a spec type, right? Where you say link and then a you know, link colon and then the thing that I hope to be linked globally. You very, very rarely actually want that, and I'm not sure. I mean, it's pushing for global dependencies. It's not going to work if you have multiple projects with different link, you know, link specs sort of attached. And I'm not sure that there are very many cases where you necessarily want a global link rather than a symlink to some specific target.
I have
Go ahead,
the
Roy.
impression that, yeah, this discussion might be coming from the same place or a similar place from the bin dependencies one, like similar kind of pain point people want to address, but like they're proposing solutions, but like maybe we should think more about the problem itself. And yeah, because I feel like, yeah, there's similar things to the bin dependencies, like, yeah, exposing like this common global dependencies that they use all the time. They don't want it to live in their projects, etc.
I also see this having a little bit of overlap with the workspaces stuff, because it's possible that what they really want is a workspace and they're just not aware of it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
They do reference Lerna, and in terms of prior art, they reference Composer there towards the bottom in terms of the actual verbiage of the second sort of piece, yeah. Like aliasing. So I think they are aware. So that's one where I think there's probably some follow-up discussion, again, to either break down the actual problem, whether it's, to Roy's point, like sussing out the root cause of the pain point, or to actually break up and make smaller the ask, the change, to Wes's point. So I think that there's an action item there on our side to probably just follow up. Also, potentially, I know that I added this late to the agenda, so giving the author some a head start in terms of being aware that we're having these calls and being able to join the discussion would be great. Apologize that, to them for not following up sooner. So that's on us.
I was actually going to, can I, since you brought that up, can I have another, it would be nice to ping the authors of the RFCs along with the meeting creation. So I have just recently been looking at automated meeting creation stuff, and I have been thinking about actually adding that to my little default meeting creator thing. And since you brought it up, I think it would, because this is the second one, even on this call, where the author is not present. And I think it would be very helpful if we tried to,
they're at least invited.
Easier for people in the future. Well, yeah. Explicitly invited, yeah.
Yeah. At least know what's happening so they can read or catch up later or read the notes or whatever.
Yeah, I'll admit that that's on me to do a better job. We have some automation for these calls. I know just before the new year, we had the agenda being created automatically. Unfortunately, a lot of that pinging generation, these calls themselves, so it's a lot of manual work right now. We sort of bootstrap them ad hoc, which means that this is not the first time we've actually talked about making improvements to that. So Wes, if you end up, fully realizing some of that tooling, we'd love to steal that, because it's not we're not in a unique position here. I know that
it is not stealing. I just merged, or I'm actually, I just merged the one on the web server framework. So if that works later today, it should run sometime tonight. Then it is GitHub action away. And the template, you just have to write the template that would auto tag the author in it.
That's great. Yeah, I'll definitely look at that again. I saw that you were working on that stuff. So we want to make this.
Tyrion and I will be moving it over to PKG.js and then combining some efforts, because he's been working on one for the node org. If you want to, I can just submit a PR to the RFCs if you're interested in that.
I would love that.
Okay,
no joke.
I will add that to my
I would absolutely love that. Right now, actually, the generation for this agenda and some of the automation still lives in a open source project called Status Board, which you may or may not also know. So there's a bunch of scripts in there that generate different things for this team. So the agenda is actually in there. So you could go steal whatever logic lives there today. I have to manually run the npm script, so the GitHub action somehow is failing. But yeah, it's a good thing to note, and definitely something that we need to do. For the deep dives, those are a bit more manual, where I often have pinged some of the folks that have been most loud in different discussions to hopefully bring them to those deep dive discussions. So I'm not sure how we can automate that so much, as there's a bit of manual work about which topic we're going to be discussing. But definitely the agenda creation can ping the authors of those RFCs or the issues for sure. Awesome. Okay, so moving on then, I do want to leave a little bit of time at the end of this call to discuss maybe what that topic will be for next week's deep dive. So the last item on here, the last RFC actually that we have identified is adding types. So RFC, or in pull request number 126 or 126, would be adding type or type information to the document. I know this is something that I've been poked about, for a while now on Twitter and various other places, and finally, an RFC has been created. This is by Orta. I'm not sure if anybody has any strong feelings about this one way or another, but adding extra metadata to the document can, it's going to bloat those requests. Might be one person's thought, but also it might be super helpful for the community to have, right? So
I have two strong feelings about this. One is super helpful, and we should figure out a way to support ecosystems adding metadata that is valuable to their sets of packages. That said, adding types, in this case, preferences one ecosystem that I think is unfair, and we should be very considerate as we we look at these kind of things and say like, look, you're just, yeah, TypeScript people are very vocal and it's gained so much popularity that, you know, it becomes important. But I'm sure there are other ecosystems that have the same exact problems, and because they don't have the popularity, they're going to look and be like, well, I'm not going to be able to get my RFC merged to NPM because, like, why would they support my offshoot typed, you know, definition language, or Flow? I don't know, maybe Flow even. Does Flow have a separate type definition? Either way, if we did TypeScript support in this way, I think we would have to make sure we consider how other ecosystems would be either disproportionately or disadvantaged by that choice, right?
Yeah. So looking at like looking at the life cycle of JavaScript frameworks, they tend to rise and fall with the years, and it's a pretty safe bet that React will be around in, or TypeScript will be around in another 3 to 5 years. It's a much less safe bet that it'll still be around in the next 5 to 10 years, or without, or that'll be, it's a safer bet that it'll be superseded by something else. They kind of rise up and they reach some steady state and then dwindle or trickle off. Like handlebars and jQuery are still very, very widely used, but they're not growing like they used to be. So I hear you on the privileging, sort of privileging TypeScript per se. I think it might be a mistake, and it may end up being a wart that we come to regret, especially if TypeScript eventually changes the way that they do type inference or type information. And there are other typing systems. I know Hegel is one that I was actually looking at recently that's pretty cool, but and also uses the same type definitions that TypeScript does, just kind of to piggyback on that community's popularity. One thing about this RFC in particular, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing this today, right? You can just sort of put it in your package JSON and it'll show up in the package. Like it's actually that simple. It won't show up in the minified package unless we do a little bit of extra work. But if people start using that stuff pretty widely, like, then of course we would add that to the minified package if there was some reason to at tree generation or search time. Getting it into the actual website again is more of like a product feature request, and the argument for doing that is, well, all of these package JSONs that have been published already have type information kind of bundled into them. It's really almost more of like a request for TypeScript, right? Like that they should read the type def file name from the package JSON file, which I think makes a ton of sense. I don't know if there's already some way to do that within your package JSON.
The field they're asking for already works that way. Like when it's installed on disk, it reads it from the typings field. They're just trying to expose it in the package, so you don't need the tarball to come up with the waterfall of types.
And then the request I've also seen is that information that is displayed by default on package pages or whatever as well, to create that link and association, and just for ease of use in terms of not having to go to a third-party source of truth for that information. Right.
So I think really I'm not sure what the ask is here as far as what the CLI does. I think the ask here is like, infer that there is a typing file when we're publishing. And if you see like index.d.ts, then we automatically add something to the package when we publish.
Yeah, like has TypeScript definition, or has types is the true, like, could be added to Corgi doc type thing, similar to like has install scripts.
That's not even the same file name. Like it's not always going to be foo.js and foo.d.ts. Like often you'll have one big mega DTS file for the entire project and a bunch of scattered files that are transpiler outputs. So like I really think that the typings field, and I'm not advocating for it. I agree with Wes's concerns about over privileging things like that. But I really think exposing the typings field is probably the most straightforward solution.
Yeah, I'm just not sure why we would need it at package resolution time, which is what the Corgi doc is for. Exposing it on the website, I mean, yeah, totally fine with that. But I think also I'm trying to shy away from adding a lot of extra fields to the package.json file that we read and publish. So from that point of view, I would almost say, like, let's just not do it. Like, if you want to put it in your package.json, go for it.
So I think I see the conflation here. Isaac, it sounds like what you're thinking of the Pacument as, or the Corgi doc or whatever it's called, is the stuff you need at resolution time.
Well, the Corgi doc, yes, not the Pacument. The Pacument is
okay.
The full. Okay, so Pacument is actually a vague term. The full metadata Pacument is everything. It includes the description, it includes the author name, it includes a bunch of, you know, junk that you don't need when you're just installing a package. The Corgi doc is the minified Pacument, which only has the dependencies and, you know, the bin scripts and the things that we kind of need to, like, consider while building the tree.
Does the full Pacument contain the typings field, let's say?
If you put it in package.json, yeah.
Okay.
It includes everything that's in your package.json.
So I'm wondering if maybe that's just not clear to the RFC requester, and it wasn't to me either. Like, I think that there's often a need to want to get information without having to download and extract all the tarballs of your dependency graph.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was this, for example, a trivial way to say, give me the Pacuments for my entire dependency graph, but nothing else. That seems like it might solve a lot of use cases, including this one, without needing any additional changes to NPM. Like, I didn't get the impression from that RFC that they need it in the Corgi doc necessarily. I think they just want it not only in the tarball.
The impression I got was that they want it on the website, so that when you're evaluating a you know, which
and the website
package to use,
only works with the Corgi doc and not with the full one.
It works only with the full one.
Oh, okay. Well,
because it has to show, you know, it has to show a bunch of stuff. It shows the description and the author and the everything, maintainers, etc.
So I think is the answer here then very clear, is this already exists. You just have to use it, right? I mean,
so there's one point we're missing from the RFC. I was just going over it while we discussed, and in the implementation section there, they do mention that they would like to the CLI to be checking for the existence of the type definition, like the definition files, and,
mm-hmm.
and possibly error out if they're not there, right? So that's a change for the CLI.
Right. So check, if we're going to check at package installation time to verify that the file is there, then that is going to have to be in the Corgi doc. And I would push back pretty hard on that, because I
think possibly even at publish time.
Right, but
including
package tarball. Including it in the package tarball, and like, we could treat it similarly to how we treat bin scripts and main. Like, if you have a files list and it doesn't include your main, we just go ahead and include it anyway. You know, if there are bin scripts, then we make sure that they're included in the package artifact. We could do the same with a typings file description. Like, I don't feel like that's sort of, it's probably widely enough used that that feature is fine. You know, we do similarly with, like, I think we do a similar thing with a node.js file, and, you know, a couple of other things that are probably less widely used than TypeScript definitions. But all that being said, like, again, assuming that you are not excluding the thing from your package in some way, then it will be included. And you can put this file name in your package.json today. Like, show me people using that, and show me a way that I can make their life a little easier, and I'll probably do it. But if it's a lot of kind of net new work or changes to how we do tree resolution, then that starts to feel, makes it a lot more costly.
Yeah. Just to be mindful, we're at time, we're about 1 minute over actually. I wanted to propose the question and appreciate the discussion here. I think there's more conversation to be had about this RFC actually in the RFC itself, and just to suss out the ask more thoroughly and what we would need to do to support that. So if we want to, we can have that discussion async. But I do want to be mindful, next week we do have another deep dive call set up. I'm not sure if anybody has a specific topic that they'd like to go in deeper in mind. I'm open to proposals. If there's any specific RFC that we feel would be good to go deep into.
I think we could actually do a deep dive round 2 on overrides, to be honest. Given the added exploration that's been done in Slack and on the GitHub issue, it may be worthwhile, because we're in a significantly different place than we were a couple weeks ago.
That sounds good. Any objections?
I was going to bring that up, so that sounds good
awesome.
to me.
Awesome. So go ahead. Glenn, were you going to say something?
No, good.
Okay. So I'll set that up for next week. Appreciate everybody joining today. And I don't know who I have to thank for all the notes. I'm not sure who that was, or if that was a team effort.
I think it was a team effort.
Yeah.
Team effort. Appreciate that. That's great. Hopefully we'll have Claudia back on by next week to help with that. I know she's been doing a great job there. So again, appreciate everybody jumping on for the RFC call today. And again, hopefully keep having discussions in the issues and PRs themselves. And I'll see you next week. Ciao.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.